Welcome to the Right News Network.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emma with the headlines that matter most right now. The Trump administration is making good on a threat to pull thousands of American troops out of Germany, marking a dramatic escalation in a dispute with Berlin over Iran policy. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has more. Layla?
Well, Emma, that's right. The Pentagon just confirmed that about 5,000 U.S. troops will be withdrawn from Germany over the next 6 to 12 months. This all stems from a pretty serious clash between Trump and German Chancellor Merz over how to handle the Iran situation. Merz essentially said America was being humiliated by Iran, and Trump didn't take that well. Now he's following through on his threat to pull troops out of the country.
So what's driving this feud between Trump and Merz specifically?
Look, here's the thing. Trump has been pushing all his European allies, especially Germany, to ramp up military support against Iran. He's frustrated that they're not willing to do what he sees as their share in this conflict. Germany has been more cautious, more diplomatic in its approach, and that's created real tension. Trump sees it as weakness. For Merz, it's about trying to maintain a more balanced foreign policy. It's a fundamental disagreement about strategy.
Layla, appreciate the context. Still on world affairs, the Trump administration's claims about the Iran conflict are creating a major constitutional standoff in Washington. Layla is still with us. Layla, what is the latest?
Well, Emma, so Trump's basically telling Congress that because there's a ceasefire in place, he doesn't need their permission to keep troops in the Middle East or resume military operations. The thing is, he's also rejecting Iran's new peace proposal, saying he's not satisfied with it. So you've got this really contradictory position where the White House says the war's over, but they're keeping all their military assets in the region and leaving the door open for escalation.
So is Congress actually accepting that argument?
Look, Democrats are pushing back hard. They're saying this violates the War Powers Resolution, the law that's supposed to require presidential approval after a certain period. But here's the thing. Trump's lawyers are arguing the ceasefire technically means hostilities have stopped, so the rules don't apply. It's a legalistic debate, honestly, but the real question is what happens if Iran's proposal gets rejected and talks break down completely? Then you've got U.S. troops sitting in the Middle East with no congressional authorization and growing pressure to act.
Layla, appreciate it. Still on trade, tensions between Washington and Brussels are escalating fast with these new auto tariffs. Marcus Webb, our Washington correspondent, has more on what comes next. Marcus?
Well, Emma, Trump just announced he's hitting European vehicles with a 25% tariff, and the EU's already firing back, calling it completely unacceptable. What's interesting is the Supreme Court already blocked his tariff strategy earlier this year, so there's real questions about whether he's got the legal authority to do this. But the White House is arguing these tariffs are necessary to fix what they see as unfair European trade practices.
Is there any room for negotiation here, or are we headed straight into a trade war?
Look, both sides are talking tough right now, but honestly, the EU's already warned they could scrap any potential trade deal if this moves forward. They're not ruling out retaliatory tariffs on American goods, everything from agricultural products to technology. The real problem is Trump's using tariffs as a negotiating tool, but Europe sees it as economic coercion, and that's a really hard gap to close.
Marcus, appreciate it. British forces have been tested in a major air defense operation over Iraq, where a coalition base came under relentless bombardment. The RAF intercepted more than 100 Iranian-linked drones and missiles, with roughly 28 weapons fired at the base daily during recent Middle East escalations. Watch for potential Iranian responses and any announcements about adjustments to coalition force posture in the region. Still on world affairs, the Iran conflict is now threatening food security across the globe, with fertiliser shortages potentially affecting billions of meals. Yara International, the world's largest fertilizer producer, warns that Africa's poorest nations face a crisis as they scramble to afford supplies in what could become a bidding war they cannot win. Watch developments closely as world leaders face pressure to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. Remaining with global developments, the Iran conflict is creating a dual crisis, spiking freight costs that force humanitarian groups to abandon shipping routes, while oil markets remain volatile and potentially underpriced for risk. The UNHCR has rerouted refugee aid through Jordan, Dubai, and Turkey, but ExxonMobil's CEO says the market hasn't seen the full impact of what's happening. Watch energy prices closely in the coming weeks. A federal appeals court has just blocked one of the most common ways Americans access abortion medication. The ruling affects patients nationwide and could have major implications for reproductive health care. Our technology correspondent Alex Park has more. Alex?
Well, Emma, thanks. So what happened here is a court just blocked the mailing of mifepristone, which is the drug used in most abortions in the US. The appeals court issued this nationwide order that says you can't send it by mail anymore, and telehealth providers can't prescribe it remotely. This is a big deal because after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade back in 2022, a lot of patients in states that banned abortion started using mail-order mifepristone as basically their only option.
So how does this actually change things for patients right now?
Look, it changes everything immediately. I mean, if you're in a state like Texas or Oklahoma where abortion's banned, you were probably relying on getting this pill shipped to you. Now that's not possible. Patients would have to travel to another state to get an in-person clinic visit. What's interesting is the court's order is temporary while they litigate the full case, but honestly, this is almost certainly headed to the Supreme Court. So, we're going to be dealing with this legal battle for a while.
Alex Park, thanks for breaking that down. Ukraine's drone campaign is delivering a direct blow to Russia's financial war chest. Ukrainian forces struck a major Russian refinery and pumping station, marking the fourth attack on the Black Sea port of Tuapse in just 1 week. As crude prices remain elevated, these strikes threaten the oil revenues Moscow desperately needs to sustain its military operations. The Pentagon is making a major bet on artificial intelligence, signing deals with 7 tech companies including NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Amazon Web Services to power classified military networks. The move deliberately excludes AI company Anthropic, escalating a dispute over restrictions on military use of its models. Watch for additional defense AI contracts to follow throughout the year as the military accelerates deployment of these systems across command operations. President Trump has tightened the economic screws on Cuba with a new executive order targeting the island's energy, defense, and mining sectors. The sanctions threaten foreign banks with exclusion from U.S. markets if they work with Cuban government entities, all while Cuba already faces a severe fuel blockade imposed in January. Cuba's government calls it collective punishment. The Trump administration says it's pressure on an authoritarian regime.
Time to go deeper. Beyond the headlines, our full analysis of the story shaping the world right now.
The Pentagon has confirmed it. 5,000 American troops are being pulled out of Germany, ordered by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and this is happening over the next 6 to 12 months. This is not a threat anymore. This is a done deal. And the trigger? A very public, very ugly spat between President Trump and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz over Iran, with Merz publicly declaring America was being humiliated by Tehran, and Trump apparently deciding he'd heard quite enough of that. Germany hosts roughly 35,000 American troops. This withdrawal is 14% of that total, and the question is whether it stops there. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is Trump right to pull these troops, or is he handing Vladimir Putin the best gift he's received in years?
Thanks, Emma. And I'll tell you exactly what I think. Trump is not only right, he's arguably overdue. Here's the thing. Germany has spent the better part of 3 decades treating American military presence as a permanent subsidy, requiring no reciprocal obligation whatsoever. Friedrich Merz stands up and publicly calls America humiliated by Iran, while American soldiers are literally stationed on German soil, while American taxpayers are funding Germany's defense umbrella, and he expects 0 consequences. That is not an alliance. That is a dependency pretending to be a partnership. Tucker Carlson has been making this point for years, and the foreign policy establishment has mocked him for it. Who's laughing now? What Pete Hegseth has done is apply basic leverage, the kind of leverage that serious defense secretaries use when allies stop behaving like allies. And the idea that this gifts Putin anything is frankly lazy thinking. Putin is more concerned about a coherent, funded, serious NATO, and right now Germany has been one of the weakest links in that chain.
But, Marcus, devil's advocate, Germany only just crossed the 2% NATO spending threshold last year. They are building up their military, and publicly embarrassing a European leader over a diplomatic disagreement could push the entire EU further away from Washington at the worst possible moment. Isn't there a risk this becomes self-fulfilling? And Sophia, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Marcus isn't wrong about the burden-sharing history, but I think he's underestimating the economic consequences of getting this wrong. Here's what I think Marcus is missing. The American military presence in Germany isn't charity. It's strategic infrastructure that the United States itself benefits from enormously. Ramstein Air Base is a critical logistics hub for American operations across Africa and the Middle East. You don't just relocate that capability without cost. According to Pentagon figures, the annual economic activity generated by American bases in Germany runs into the billions for American contractors, American logistics firms, American personnel. And here's the data point that should give everyone pause. The last time there was serious talk of a major NATO rupture, the Iraq War era 2003, it took years and enormous diplomatic capital to repair. The trajectory suggests that if this escalates beyond 5,000, you're looking at a structural shift in European security architecture that markets will price in very quickly and not favorably.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. Yes, Ramstein is valuable. Yes, there are economic interdependencies, but you know what else has a cost? Maintaining 35,000 troops in a country whose leader publicly humiliates your president on the world stage. You cannot run a coherent security alliance on the basis that no action ever has consequences. If Merz faces 0 accountability for that kind of language, what signal does that send to every other NATO member? It says you can say and do whatever you like, and America will stay put. That's not strength, that's weakness. And weakness invites exactly the kind of instability Sophia is worried about. Short, punchy truth. Allies who respect you defend alongside you. Allies who don't respect you freeload off you.
Here's what I want to know, because this is the scenario that should be keeping people up at night. If Germany doesn't blink, if Merz digs in and the European Union starts seriously talking about independent defense arrangements without Washington, are we looking at the end of NATO as a functioning alliance within a decade? Sophia, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, and I want to be careful here because there are genuinely multiple trajectories, is that Merz almost certainly recalibrates privately, because the German economy cannot afford the geopolitical uncertainty of a broken transatlantic relationship. German exports, German energy security, German financial markets, all of it is deeply entangled with American partnership. If this trajectory continues toward genuine rupture, German bond markets will feel it, business investment will feel it. Merz is a pragmatist, ultimately, and pragmatists respond to economic reality when diplomatic pride stops working. The real question is whether that recalibration happens fast enough to prevent the operational drawdown from becoming permanent.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario nobody in the mainstream is talking about. The real risk isn't Germany. Germany will come around. The real risk is the message this sends to the middle tier of NATO, the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, countries that are genuinely on the front line, that have been spending their defense budgets seriously, that have skin in the game. If those allies start to read this episode as evidence that American commitments are contingent and unpredictable, they may start making their own alternative arrangements, and those arrangements may not serve Western interests. The trajectory suggests we have roughly a 6-month window to either resolve this or watch the alliance's credibility fracture along lines that will be very difficult to repair.
Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves, a genuinely fascinating and genuinely alarming debate. Somewhere in Berlin tonight, Friedrich Merz is staring at a very expensive lesson in what it costs to humiliate the only country standing between Germany and a much darker world. The White House has now officially told Congress that hostilities with Iran have terminated, citing the April ceasefire to argue that Trump doesn't need congressional authorization for the war. But American troops are still in the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed, and Trump himself is saying he's not satisfied with Iran's latest peace proposal, and that he's considering options to blast the hell out of Tehran. So which is it? War over or war on hold? Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Is Trump playing legal games with Congress? Or is he genuinely managing a situation that defies the old constitutional categories?
Thanks, Emma. Look, I'll be blunt. The war powers debate is a sideshow, and the Democrats pushing it know it's a sideshow. What Trump is doing here is asserting that the executive branch retains the authority to manage a dynamic military and diplomatic situation without Congress micromanaging every phase of it. And frankly, given the way Congress has performed on national security issues for the last 2 decades, that instinct is not entirely wrong. Douglas Murray has made this point repeatedly. The West's institutional paralysis in the face of aggressive adversaries is not a feature, it's a catastrophic bug. Iran has been building toward this moment for 40 years. The Obama administration gave them $150 billion and a nuclear deal they proceeded to shred. The Biden administration spent 4 years begging to re-enter that same failed agreement. Trump is the first president in a generation to actually impose costs, and now people want to stop him over a procedural letter? I'm sorry, but that is not serious governance. The real story is Iran at 84% uranium enrichment and a Strait of Hormuz that's choking the global oil supply as we speak.
But Sophia, isn't there a legitimate constitutional question here? Congress hasn't declared war, the 60-day clock has run out, and Trump is essentially saying, trust me, it's over, while simultaneously threatening to, quote, blast the hell out of Iran. Doesn't that strike you as trying to have it both ways? And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I think Sophia's missing the forest for the trees a bit here. Yes, Iran is a bad actor. Yes, the nuclear program is a serious threat. But here's what I keep coming back to. The Strait of Hormuz handles 20 million barrels of oil a day. 20 million. Every single day that waterway stays effectively closed, the global economy takes a hit that compounds. The Telegraph reported this week that Britain's food supply chain is already in crisis. And the longer this drags on without a defined legal framework and a clear endgame, the more economic damage piles up, not just in Tehran, but in Birmingham, in Sydney, in Chicago. Free markets need predictable energy supply to function. The risk of Trump's approach isn't that it's too tough. It's that it lacks the kind of institutional architecture that converts military pressure into durable strategic outcomes. I actually think a vote in Congress, uncomfortable as it would give this operation legitimacy and staying power that an executive letter simply cannot.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. Congressional legitimacy for what exactly? For a body that can't agree on a budget to weigh in on real-time military strategy? Come on. Iran's playbook is delay, dilute, and exhaust. Every time we pause and say, let's go back to the institutions, Tehran buys another 6 months. Another 6 months of enrichment. Another 6 months of proxy rebuilding. Another 6 months of straight disruption. The economic pain James is describing is real. I agree with every number he cited. But the solution to that pain is not a congressional vote. It's Iran backing down. Full stop. Trump holding the threat of escalation on the table is the only reason Tehran is submitting any proposal at all. The moment he looks constrained by Congress, by the courts, by public opinion, Iran smells weakness and the proposal disappears.
Here's what I want to know. Iran has now delivered a new proposal through Pakistani intermediaries. Trump says he's not satisfied, and we've got troops still deployed, a strait still choked, and costs soaring globally. Where does this actually go from here? James, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, there are really three possibilities, and none of them are clean. First, and this is the hopeful scenario, Iran's domestic economic situation is so severe that hardliners lose the internal argument, and Tehran makes genuine concessions on enrichment. Possible, but the trajectory doesn't strongly support it. Second, and more likely, negotiations drag on for months. The ceasefire becomes the de facto permanent state, and nobody wins. Iran keeps its program intact, the strait situation festers, and we kick the can down the road for the next administration. Third, and this is the one that genuinely worries me, miscalculation. A regime under existential pressure does unpredictable things. If current trends continue and Iran feels cornered, the risk of an engineered incident that forces a second round of escalation is very real. The markets would not handle that well.
Here's what concerns me most. It's not the military scenario, it's the political one. The real risk is that domestic pressure in the United States, driven by energy prices, by food costs, by media obsession with the war powers procedural drama, forces Trump into accepting a deal that looks like progress but leaves Iran's fundamental capabilities intact. That is exactly what happened in 2015. That is the Obama playbook. A bad deal dressed up as diplomacy. If Trump blinks, if he takes the first halfway decent Iranian proposal because the political pressure gets too hot, then this whole confrontation will have achieved nothing except proving to Tehran that America will always fold eventually. History tells us that lesson is the most dangerous one you can teach a revolutionary regime.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen, two very different visions of how this ends, and both of them should make you uncomfortable. One thing is absolutely certain. Someone in Tehran is studying that letter to Congress very, very carefully tonight, and they didn't like what they read.
That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.